Hi, I'd like to tell you about a new feature that I've added to Power Composer. And if you don't know what that is, Power Composer is this music making program that I've been developing for over a year now. It's meant to be very easy to use. It's so easy to use that I've ended up getting a lot of interest from people who have never made music before and want to use Power Composer as their entry point into the world of composing, which is great. But I think there's a pretty big obstacle that people are going to run into that I feel like I need to address, which is that composing music is really hard. Like with this program, it's easy to place notes like this, right? And then we can press play. And there we go. Technically, we've made a song. It's very easy to do. But if you're new to making music, it's not at all intuitive where you should be placing notes to make a song that ends up sounding any good without like a lot of just trial and error. So I came up with this feature that I think will help somewhat tackle this issue. It probably sounds like I'm going to suggest a feature that uses generative AI to make a song for you or something. It's definitely not that. It's a lot simpler than that. I call this feature the pitch guide. And all it does is that when you turn it on, it'll change these horizontal guidelines that sit in the background. It changes the lines from looking like this to looking like this. And it also opens up this editor wheel that'll let you customize those lines even further, and even lets you customize them midway through the song. But I'll hide that for right now, and I'll talk about how that works later. So this might not sound like the most exciting thing ever, right? We're just changing these background guidelines. But here's why I think this is a neat feature. If you're more experienced in music making, you can use this feature to annotate regions of your song to help describe its harmonic contents. But if you're a complete beginner, you can just turn it on like we've done. And if you stick to drawing notes on these lines, and especially if you start and end your song on these primary dark black lines, then you'll much more easily come up with a song that sounds a lot less like random notes. And I'll try that out now, and I'll turn this down a little bit. Maybe up here. All right, let's hear how that sounds. And then maybe let's do that for fun. All right, see? I would say we've made a song there that is certifiably not terrible. So that's the basic idea for this feature. Now I'd like to explain a little further in depth. I'll explain why these guides have this new pattern, and I'll get into how this editor wheel works. But I want this explanation to be accessible for everyone. So I'm also going to cover some music theory basics. And we're starting at the very beginning. So first, let's define the term pitch. So in Power Composer, a pitch is where a note is located vertically. So if we take this note here and we were to move it up, we would say that this note has a high pitch. And it sounds like that, a little like tinny, a little lighter. If we were to move this note down here, right, if it's lower on the screen, it's said to have a lower pitch and might sound something like this. Right? It's got a more bassy, more resonant tone to it. If you think of a grand piano with 88 keys, each key plays a unique pitch. Notes to the right play higher pitches, and notes to the left play lower pitches. This is why we have this piano here on the left side, as it's acting as sort of a reference to what the pitches are going to be in the draw area. If you're new to composing and worried that we need to memorize like 88 pitches in order to be able to compose with them, then don't worry, because we only need to remember 12. And that's because we can think of all the pitches as just a series of 12 pitch types that repeat over and over again. These 12 types are called pitch classes. Here's a list of all of them. Some of them are labeled with just a single letter, like A, B, and C, and so on, while some of them are labeled as a letter with an accidental, like A sharp, C sharp, D sharp, and so on. The sharp just means it's a bit higher, so A sharp means that it's a pitch slightly higher than A. These can also be written with the flat accidental as well, with flat just meaning lower. So you can write A sharp as B flat, and C sharp as D flat, D sharp as E flat, and so on. If we open up the pitch guide editor wheel again, you can see all these pitch classes in the outer ring of the wheel, and they're shown with the sharp and flat versions. Again, this is a repeating series, so each pitch class is represented multiple times on the piano. For instance, there's an A right here, 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 and here, and so on. This repetition is why on the piano, this sequence of notes with these 2 black keys and these 3 black keys up here, that's why this sequence repeats every 12 notes on the piano. That's why in Power Composer, when you turn on the pitch guide, this primary black line repeats every 12 notes. And that's why when you look at the pitch guide editor, you see all the pitch classes arranged in a circle with 12 segments. I should also mention that when you play multiple notes that share the same pitch class, they sort of blend together seamlessly. For example, if I were to play an A on the piano, that would be right here, and it sounds like this. Then I'll play that note with another note that is 6 semitones up, which would be the D sharp, and that sounds like this. Right? That's a pretty clashy, dissonant chord. Now, if I were to play it again, that A with another note that is 12 semitones up, which would be another A, that would sound like this. And hear the difference from this to this. It almost sounds like one note because there's no clashing or dissonance at all. So as you can see, with our pitch guide turned on, we've set one pitch class, in this case the pitch class of C, to be the main pitch class of our song. That's why these primary black lines are over the C pitch class. That's why it says C up here on this button where we turned on the pitch guide feature. And in the pitch guide editor, that's why this C is highlighted here. So that's the black lines, but why are the gray lines arranged the way they are? To explain that, we need to now explain scales. A scale is a sequence of pitches, but instead of defining this sequence with literal pitches like A, B, C, and so on, the sequence is defined by the interval or distance from the first note of the scale. So for an example, let me just draw out a major scale here in Power Composer. And as you see, I'm just sticking to the grid lines here because the grid lines just so happen to be a major scale. But here's what's important to understand. If I were to select all these notes and move it any number of tones up or down, that is still a major scale because it's not the exact pitches that define what type of scale it is. It's what each note's distance is to the very first note of the scale that matters. If we want to solidify where this major scale is going to be exactly, all we need to do is establish what that first note is. So our first note right now is an A flat, and I can say we're using the scale of A flat major, and that means it starts at the A flat, and then all the notes preceding it follow the intervals of the major scale. In music theory terminology, this combination of a main pitch class plus a scale is called a key. If you've ever heard someone say this song is in the key of C major, what they're saying is this song uses the pitch classes of the major scale, and that scale is relative to the pitch class of C. So, in one sense, what we're doing with this pitch guide feature is establishing the key with our black lines being the main pitch class and the gray lines being the scale. I suppose it's time that I actually explain how this editor wheel works now. Well, we can change the black lines by just clicking on segments of this outer ring, and we can even click the inactive ones here. And then we can modify the gray lines by toggling on these inner ring segments. If we want to set a particular scale, well, we only have 3 available, but we click the scale preset button, and then we can click major, minor, and right now we also have the blues scale. If I set it to major, for instance, it'll set a major scale relative to what we have set as the primary pitch class. So right now we have a C sharp major scale set as our key. Sometimes songs have key changes, and we can follow that key change with the pitch guide by changing it mid-song. When I hover over this pitch guide button, I can select show track, and that is going to bring up the timeline for our pitch guide changes. I can insert a change right here, for instance. I can move the playhead to that change, and then I can make any edits that I want, and that'll now be reflected only at that position. So you can see the pitch guide changes during the song. I can also turn on the create on edit mode, and then wherever the playhead is, whenever I make any edits to this at all, it's going to create a new change to where the playhead is. So we can use the pitch guide to show the song's key, and even follow the song's key changes, but I think there's another viable use for this feature. I mean, you can use this feature however you want. We're just editing the guidelines. None of this will change the actual contents of our song. But besides setting the pitch guide to the key of the song, I also think it'll be helpful to sometimes show the chord changes. So let's discuss chords. A chord is just when you play multiple notes at the same time. It doesn't have to necessarily sound good to be considered a chord. For example, let's say we play these 2 notes together. Now, obviously, that's a pretty nasty chord, but maybe you want a more dissonant, clashing chord because it resolves into something better. Say like this resolving into this. Chords are a pretty fundamental building block in music making. One of their uses is setting the context when being played alongside a melody. For example, let's play this happy sounding melody I just made all by itself. All right, when you hear that in isolation, it sounds pretty cheery. Now let's play that again, but with the background chords that I've added. That melody, thanks to those background chords, takes on a completely different tone. Chords share some similarities to keys. Remember how there's a key of C major? Well, there also exists a C major chord. I've drawn it out here. It sounds like this. Just like the key, this C major chord has a main pitch class, which is this C, which is here at the bottom. Plus, it has some secondary notes that lie within the major scale, specifically the 3rd note of the scale, which is an E, and the 5th note of the scale, which is right here, which is a G. If we look back at the pitch guide editor, we can see where the 5th note of the scale and the 3rd note of the scale are. In this inner ring, we see this 5 next to the G, and we see this 3 next to the E. The reason that this 3 is colored green and has the up arrow next to it is to denote it as the major third as opposed to the minor third, as in it's the third of the major scale. We can switch by just clicking on that to toggle it off and toggle on the one right next to it, and that's the minor third. The reason why the 4th and 5th don't have arrows is because those stay consistent between those 2 scale types. It's pretty typical that the chords change pretty frequently throughout the song. As you can see here, I've got a melody and the underlying chords are changing throughout, even though the key is consistent. We still are always in the key of C. Let's just hear how it sounds really quickly. Now, if we want to, we can use the pitch guide to show where the chord changes are, and I could do that now by turning on the pitch guide. I'll turn on the create on edit mode, And then for here, this first chord change is a G. This goes back to C. It goes to an F. It goes to a G and then back to C. And now the pitch guide follows all the chord changes in the song, which isn't necessary to do, but might make it easier when we want to add more to the song. Let's try that now. Let's add a bass part. And I'm just going to draw in, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to add notes down here because a bass means lower pitch, so in the lower pitch range was down here, and all I'm going to do is draw notes on the primary black lines. So I'm just going to do that now by adding these little parts here. Let's just add them all like this and then just move the notes to the black lines. How about that? And then here, and then here, and then here. Actually, let's go back up. All right, let's see how that sounds. All right, I sound pretty good. So that's probably enough info dumping for one video. If some of that was confusing, I hope trying out Power Composer and using the feature yourself will help make things click. Power Composer isn't available to download quite yet. I'm still working on it, but if you want to be the first to be notified about its release, then you can join the Power Composer Discord server, or you can just subscribe to this channel. Thank you so much for watching.